Hey, what's up, everybody? MetaGamesGX here, and we are doing episode 2 of BrandedCast. We are joined by the illustrious Sam Jiang. Hello, how are you doing, sir?
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me on, Chris. Very honored to be here.
So, I'm familiar. I was first familiar with you through your YCS Vegas appearance in the 3v3 when you were piloting Branded. I think I specifically remember that you were on, I believe you were on Allura Darkness then. You might be able to correct me. But you
Oh, yeah,
basic
that's right.
and that made me very happy because I thought I was gonna have to cut Allura Darkness back then because of Droll and Lockbird, and then I started testing Allura. I was like, oh, we can still do this. So that was a very cool.
Sure.
We were streaming too, so we were all cheering you on, and so it's very happy to finally get you on the channel. And see what you've been up to with the format, and then talk about a few different things. We're going to be talking about uh, we're going to be talking about matchups. We're going to be talking about a couple of the brand new matchups between Tenpai and Melodious, and just a few of the things that we can do, I think, between for the branded deck for those decks, and then also or just interactions you really kind of have to know. And then also I'd like to talk about his history with the game, just how he started with Yu-Gi-Oh, and then how he got into branded, and then we're also going to talk about um, deck building philosophies with branded, because I think this is something that Sam wanted to bring up, and I thought it was an amazing topic, frankly, because I've always kind of talked about or touched on at least the subject about how branded you can play it so many different ways, and there's so many different
Yeah.
building philosophies. Um, we could actually just probably jump into it right into this, but we see it branded through the formats. Like I got this comment the other day which kind of enumerates or kind of illustrates this, where I was running a build that I think it was like Allure Darkness, it had patchwork and stuff like that. I was very much playing into Droll, and he was like, this kind of build for branded wasn't viable a few different formats. Why is it viable now? And I think that just kind of shows that branded, you can pilot it a lot of different ways, like through different types of formats, and you can kind of there's different tools that you can use for the deck to kind of just um you know uh so it just makes it so that the deck can be piloted a whole different bunch of different ways. So I'd like you to kind of dive into that, and how do you feel about like kind of deck building with branded?
So yeah, I mean, you touched on a bit, but Bandit is really, really weird as an archetype because it has been playable way longer than most archetypes are playable competitively. Um, like Branded came out, I mean, let's say like 2 years ago at this point, and it's been playable in most formats since its release. And because of that, and it's something that's not necessarily seen. Usually, X are meta for 3 to 6 months, and then maybe they're playable for like a year after their release. But generally not, as long-standing as Branded. And I think that's one of the reasons why Branded has so many fans, people who love to one-trick Branded like you and I. Um, so yeah, going off that though, one of the big things with branded deck building that I think is really important to point out is that you shouldn't get attached to any particular way of playing the deck, whether that's playing patchwork or not playing patchwork, or playing cross out or not, or playing allure, or playing branded synchro, or playing branded tier. The correct way to play branded will always shift from format to format, when there's a new ban list, when there's a new set release, and sometimes even without those things, the correct version of branded to play changes. Um, when, for example, certain choices or certain non-engine choices like hand traps or board breakers become more popular because of another deck, that oftentimes influences branded deck building as well. Um, and it also influences the ratios of cards. Um, the longest time think you and I can both agree, two Cartesia was pretty much like correct. You know, two Cartesia for the longest time was like the gold standard, and you play that with three deployment.
Yep.
Um, I, I mean, nowadays a lot of people play three, and I'd argue that in the current format, if you're playing a higher than 45 deck count, it's probably just mandatory to play three almost. Um, Another trend that like has shifted is like um, Routed Dragon. That card was a one of for the longest time, and now with how things have shifted, it is very very often played at three. Um, so like a lot of these things, I know people have their ways that they love playing branded, but I'd really encourage people to be a little bit more open-minded and not stick to the way that they're always used to, because it's the objectively correct way to play branded for whatever format. Um, really changes. It shifts all the time. I think that my checklist personally that I use for DB testing or locals or regionals and YCSs, um, that never stays the same for longer than 2 weeks. Things change too quickly. There's too much information on the internet right now. Too many, and these meta shifts happen so quickly. Yeah, it's just like constantly changing all the time.
100%. That's what I kind of love about the Yu-Gi-Oh landscape now, because I used to be into the game back, I guess back like 2009, and like even in 2014, information did not move very fast. Like text, people just wouldn't see text until these YCSs basic or YCS to YCS, and now like the meta basically has these micro shifts every 2 weeks, so it's just through different events, just different text coming up. Like we saw kind of like the board breaker dynamic with snake eyes with hand traps, and then also we saw like a couple weeks there with like stun really cropping up. Like it felt like every time you would
Oh
go on
yeah,
ladder, like you would have to play stun. And I found it interesting how you, because you did very well during like the stun apocalypse. And I feel like your
yeah.
solution for that was kind of like double guardian chimera, which is, I felt like was very cool and unconventional, but like it worked for you. Um, and
Yeah. Um, that's one of the perfect examples of like you know building your deck based off of what's happening around you and not having an ego in terms of what you think is, oh, I think this is correct, I think this is incorrect, and just simply responding to what happens around you, right? Because I'm not currently playing two Guardian Chimera right now, and that's because stun is just not that popular right now. People are playing a lot of other stuff, and but for there was a 2 week period in time where I swear to God, every other match on DB was stun.
yes.
Like seriously, stun was literally everywhere. Um, and branded is also really cool in the sense that even though we are locked into fusions most of the time, there is so many cool deck building concessions that we can try to do to uh, for whatever X matchup. Um, and yeah, Guardian Chimera for a stun was very much one of those concessions that ended up working really well for me in the tournament.
Yeah, no, that's what we love to see. And I think like even though it's a fusion deck, you have so much, like you said, kind of like option trees that you can go down with deck building to kind of just combat the current tax and the current shade of the meta that's going on, which is why like you said kind of towards the beginning, like branded has been this eternal deck since it's really come out, always just kind of within like the top like 5 to 10 best decks, which
Yeah.
I think definitely is lended by like kind of, the ban list has been good to us, but also I think
Oh yes, definitely.
like I don't know about you, but I thought the last ban list we would probably get Sanctifier on the list, but to be honest,
Yeah.
with the cards not, it's a hard deck to pilot, so you don't see it really, winning YCSs out here.
Yeah, I think so. Like one of the reasons I feel like SBA tends to not necessarily win YCSs is that like there's an opportunity cost playing branded, and that is that if you want to be a good branded player, it takes a lot of repetition. And then sometimes when you switch up a build, like you were not playing patchwork for the longest time, and now you suddenly are playing patchwork because you think it's better that format. Um, it like changes how you play and a lot of these tiny interactions, to the point where you have to spend a lot of time prepping for every tournament, if you're playing ranked. So a lot of the good players are simply just not going to do that. It's only the very like the handful or so of very dedicated branded one tricks who will bring branded to every single YCS. Um, and so I think even though branded is a very popular deck in terms of overall playability, in terms of what people decide is the correct option for them to bring to a YCS, sometimes they choose to not play branded because also, I mean, and this is something we both know very well. Uh, it's pretty easy to throw with branded. Like you can be in a solid game state, and the deck is hard. So like sometimes just make a tiny, tiny little mistake, and that ends up really, really mattering. So branded is also one of those decks that is uh, it can be difficult sometimes to pilot it for 11, 12 rounds, and then you have top cut too, so like 3 or 4 more rounds of that. Um, yeah, very easy to make mistakes there.
100% and well said on that. I think branded, you see the people who are able to take it to event, you see them changing kind of like their builds too from event to event. Like I talked to Clifton, I think during Nats last year, he was running a Nadir build with Lulu while Lilith, which I found pretty interesting. And this is a very good player who takes branded to, I think, basically half the YCSs he goes to, and consistently tops with it. And then we see him go to a 42 card list with YCS Raleigh with his top 16. And it kind of dovetails back into what we were talking about with the 3 Shrouded and 3 Cartesia, with this like 42 card build without Nadir servants, kind of this ultra consistency build. I think that I'm gonna circle back to the Cartesia point with Shrouded Dragon because I think that's really important. I think that like you see like even in his build, like there was this 42 card list. He still ran the 3 Cartesia. Like that card I think
Yeah,
is it's becoming standard very much for 3. I thought honestly 2 Quem was gonna become more standard than 3 Cartesia, but in my testing, 3 Cartesia has just been so good. Like most of my hands, when I don't see Cartesia, they're easily just 50% weaker. So you just need to see that card. It just helps you play through all these hand traps and even board breakers sometimes. So it's just a goaded card. I think Shrouded Dragon's a bit different, but I wouldn't doubt it if we saw that becoming the standard. But I'm not sure how you felt about 2 Quem, because is this something you've toyed with? Have you ever been a fan of 2 Quem, because this is something that I like running for like kind of a grind game and anti-nib purposes, but you can tell me how you feel about that.
yeah. So right now I am running 2 Quem in my deck personally, and I think so. A good way to explain this is to explain why I think 3 Cartesia is mandatory now. And 3 Cartesia is a response to a couple of things. But the first shift that I think is really important in the meta as to why 3 Cartesia is correct is everybody and their cousin is main decking 3 Imperm 3 Valor. So because the non-engine has shifted in response to Snake Eye Ash being one of the most broken normal summons ever, that has changed people's non-engine in their main deck to run a lot of target negation because that's super strong against normal summons Snake Eye Ash. Um, and even though that is a format shift that has nothing to do with us, it changes our engine deck building ratios because we have to account for now. everybody has 3 copies minimum of like imperm, probably 3 effect veiler as well. And if they have 6 copies of target and negation minimum in their 40 card main deck, that is a higher than 50% chance that they open at least one of those. If there's a higher than 50% chance that you are going to get hit by an imperm veiler, then you absolutely need to have something that at least lets you play through that one imperm or one veiler. So because that's the expected value. Since the probability is over 50, you should expect to get hit by that. If you didn't get hit by an imperm veiler, then you actually got lucky. Um, so
Yes.
and to go off of that, the reason for two Quem, right? Um, Double Quem is good for various reasons. One of them, like you said, is Nibiru, because if you lead with Quem on your turn one, then and it gets nibbed, then you'd really really like a second one to play off of Grand Guignol, right? So that is also why. Um, but another reason is sometimes you have to play the second Quem because there are ways in the format for your opponent to remove the first Quem without going to battle phase and without accessing the extra deck. Um, and when that's the case, then you really do need a second way to get to another Quem or another a second Quem in your deck for you to summon. Um, So an example is like Flameburge Dragon. They can just go normal summon Snake Eye, Ash, Poplar, go into Flameburge. Flameburge push your Quem back. And they can do that without accessing the extra deck. So um, because so in formats where two things are true, when Nibiru is common and when there is an easy way to remove Quem without accessing the extra deck, then like those are very good format trends that justify the deck building decision to play a second Quem. I don't know if there's any other ones that you could think of, but those were the two reasons that really popped up into my head on why I think the second Quem is really strong right now.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what's always come up for me. And also just I guess grind games when you just have more targets and making your extra cards like Titan Clad a lot better. Because I always like to try to cycle through Quem. Like a lot of people save Quem for the end phase, but if I can get to Quem in my main phase, I'll typically try to do that. And like having two gives me just a lot of luxury. And then I think like it's mainly like kind of combo lines, especially through hand traps. It enables more. I think like Nightfall has said that. I think
Yeah,
so I think that really kind of sells it for the Quem question, and the three Cartesia definitely makes sense too. And uh I would say yeah, no, because I'm thinking back to kashtira format now with Realm Nets. Um and we were all like I was personally running Dark Ruler no more in that kind of format. Like there was a lot more board breakers
and
kind of thing to deal with. A Rise Heart, or just Valor wasn't very good kind of thing. So
terrible.
yeah, so that's why I guess like one Quem felt golden in that format. Like I did not miss the second Quem whatsoever in that format. Where in this format, if I don't run the second Quem, I notice it within 2 games. Kind of thing, like where
Yeah.
I'm like, I miss it. And I guess like that can kind of dovetail into Double Grand Guignol. Is this something that you have been playing with at all? Because I've been seeing a lot more people kind of going for Double Grand Guignol over the first one, as a Grand Guignol being one of Branded's best extenders, and just having the
Absolutely.
ability to go into a second one, enabling more combo lines. I don't know if you've really how you feel about that.
So yeah, I am playing the second Grand Guignol, and I think this is a good illustration of when certain deck building decisions influence influence each other. So, because Snake Eyes is the best deck, people play 3 Imperm 3 Veiler. So because people play those hand traps in their main who play 3 Cartesia, And because we have three Cartesia, it's also better and more justified in your deck building to then play the second Grand Guignol, because now you have a second one to summon off the Cartesias you have. Um, and there's a lot of reasons why the second Grand Guignol is good. One of them is, like you said, the grind game. Grind is really good. Sometimes you just need something else to summon. And then there's some really cool tricks that you can do with the second Grand Guignol. One of them is playing through Bestials better by just not dumping Puppet on your turn and doing that on your opponent's turn. And so playing the second Grand Guignol also is better in formats where people are on a lot of Bestials in their side, which we do see right now. A lot of people do side Bestials, um, probably mostly because of us and Pierre Snake Eye and Voiceless, but um, like and the second Grand Guignol is there are also times when you want to have it as just an insurance policy. Um, I think into Zealantis as well. Having a Grand Guignol and dumping that to graveyard, getting that to graveyard somehow, so that when they go for Zealantis, um, that also is pretty important to me. Um, so yeah, like and here's another reason. Um, Brandon High Spirits. Brandon High Spirits is an amazing card, and it's also become much more popular lately because of Nightfall. I've really liked High Spirits as a card ever since the YCS Indie last year. So I brought Brandon Synchro to that YCS Indie, and in Brandon Synchro that High Spirits is a broken card. But when you have the ability to discard an extra Quem or Cartesia in your hand, especially since you're playing so many now, you're playing three Cartesia, two Quem, it's five copies. Like, if you're playing 40 cards, it's 50-50 chance to open that. Um, and like, if you only play one Grand Guignol and you dump it off of High Spirits, then that's,
That's it.
you can't really do that.
Yeah.
But when you have the second one, you have that flexibility to do that. And it's really nice sometimes because now, no matter what, you're always insulated from mid. No matter what, your opponent has to think twice about bestialing you, or they just have to accept the consequences of bestialing you. Um, so yeah, I think there's a lot of good deck building justifications for why the second Grand Guignol is really good right now. That's why I ordered a second Starlight. It should be in here soon.
Yeah, no, every time I go into the second, it's only ultra rare. I'm like, man, I need to get that second Grand Guignol. Uh,
Oh, same man. That's why I had to order it.
so we were kind of, I guess, touching on high spirits there. I think brand high spirits shout Nightfall has definitely been much. You've been seeing a lot more in multiples of like two or three even in people's decks. Um, how so this card is a really good brand high spirits is a really good way to play through hand traps and branded. You can use it in the draw phase. It's a quick effect, and I usually akin it to our own small world, except it kind of is like Nadir Servant, where it helps you play through hand traps. So it can basically bridge into most cards in your deck, which is super nice, and then it can also set up your graveyard. It also sets up Kit very well, makes that card a lot better. So I think that it just makes sense that a lot of people are running it in terms of if they're looking for a way to play through all these hand traps that are in the format. Um,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
yeah, how do you feel about
Sorry,
the
go ahead.
card and everything right now?
So this is how I view high spirits. It's high spirits to me is a way to add good redundancy to the branded deck. Um, because the only way to actually interact with high spirits in terms of a hand trap is to use Ash Blossom on it. But if you Ash high spirits, you can't Ash the branded fusion. Um, but it's bad for your opponent either way because you have an extra deck dump alongside a search when you use high spirits. So that is basically 2/3 of the card advantage you get when you use branded fusion anyways,
Yes.
right? Something else in the graveyard and a card in your hand. And you just get an extra card on field when you resolve the branded fusion. But you get uh almost the same amount of card advantage as when you branded fusion. And there's certain game states where actually the high spirits can end up being bigger impact on the game state than brand fusion. Depends. Um, but like, yeah, that is the greatest part about Brandon High Spirits because it really gives you that redundancy to play through hand traps. Now, here is the downside of High Spirits, and that is it's a dependent card. And there are both independent cards in deck building, such as Brand Fusion. You draw that, and you don't need anything else with it, and it's always good. And there are very dependent cards. For example, Despian Tragedy, where it's only good to draw with specific other cards or in specific game states for you to draw it. And the dependency of a card isn't like it's not like a black or white thing. It's like a sliding scale. Like you know, I would say like Tragedy is a more dependent card than Branded in Red, but Branded in Red is still dependent on other stuff. Having stuff in the graveyard for it to be good to hard draw, right? Um, and so Branded a very big engine deck, right? And so there's a high number of dependent cards in the deck already. So adding more dependent cards always has to not necessarily black or white, good or bad, but whenever you add more dependent cards into branded, it has to be carefully weighed, um, you know, against the opportunity cost of putting something else in that spot instead, perhaps a card less dependent on certain other cards in your hand with specific game states. Um, and so that's why we see when people do play spirits at our counts in their deck, they play additional copies of Sarnier. Um, so people always play 3 Albaz. Yeah, that's pretty standard now. And a lot of people play the 3 Shrouds, so there's that. And people always play like the one Rebellion on one Sarnier. That's 8 good dragons to discard off of it, but then people add in 2 more um, Sarniers often to get that count up for the high spirits. And so that I think is an interesting thing to reflect on. Why do that? Like we make these deck building concessions because we know that high spirits is dependent on you having a dragon in it. So it's it's just, there's a right balance for everyone and based off their deck building priorities, how many copies of high spirits they want to play. Um, Currently, I'm playing one because I don't want to play more copies of Sarnier because I don't think Sarnier is a good enough card on its own to draw. It's only good when you draw it with specific other cards, or it's only good to draw in specific matchups, or it's only good when you're already playing the game. But yeah, High Spirits is a very unique card, so that's why I wanted to go on this little tangent with like the deck building concessions that we have to make for it because I think those are thinking about things in that way is super important for cards like Spaceman.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on it very well. I think there's a couple points I wanted to kind of uh bring up that you mentioned. So like Saranir kind of just being, I think it's a pretty mid card at least right now. I think arguably last format with a Fem Nightmare format, maybe it would it felt really good to run because it felt like bestialing, like I guess having the Link Karibo in the graveyard, obviously also thus P Masquerena and then or the IP Masquerena and then branded and voiceless. I felt like overall the Bestials felt better than they had in previous formats, like in the formats before that, like Unchained, like this format that there was like 10 different decks and Bestials only really hit like 3 of those decks. So I feel like there was less of a reason to run high spirits in that kind of a format, and now that we're in a format where, oh well, the Bestials at least do some work to the top deck, so they're, Sarnier is not always just a total brick in your hand. It is at least a combo piece, but like that is where I kind of struggle with high spirits too, is when I need to up it because like if you're gonna run 3 high spirits, you are gonna need to run 3 Sarnier and even like a Magnuma, and this kind of format right now that we're in, I don't think that's totally justifiable. I mean, you certainly can, but like you said, it's a very dependent card, and if you don't want to tank your deck building, it's you're gonna have to make these ratios work with Brandon. That's kind of like what branded deck building is. At the end of the day, it's really about maintaining ratios. Like you see so many different builds go from 40 to 60 cards, and they all do well. I think that at the end of the day, the key is to getting ratios that work. I think Allure of Darkness is one of my favorite cards to run in Branded Despia, just because it's one of those old school
Great.
cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, and our deck can use it very well. So as you know, so it's something that it's another dependent card. You need to run a lot of different darks. You need to run like a certain amount of darks. That's something I always talk about with in regards to Allure of Darkness. Like if you aren't running enough darks, you're gonna end up running or drawing too many hands just full of spell cards, which is not what. That's when you start losing with Allure of Darkness. Like unfortunately at the YCS Raleigh, I ended up drawing like a hand with just Allure and no other spell or no other monsters, and that will happen no matter what. If you're running like high spirits or an Allure of Darkness, even if you run like a bunch of different dragons or a bunch of different darks, but it's all about like the consistency and trying to up your curve against the variance of the game and going through an
Yeah.
event. So I think that
Regarding that topic specifically, allure versus high spirits, right? Because uh, I think people know that it's generally not good to play both of those at 3, or it's a little much, to play both at 3. Um, but here is a big mathematical difference between allure and high spirits, and that is allure needs a dark monster in your hand, specifically, so it needs a specific type of monster, and then high spirits also specifically needs a dragon or a spellcaster or courier also works. But the primary difference is that you need to start with the discard in your hand with high spirits. Whereas allure, you draw into 2 extra cards, so you see 2 extra cards before you decide what to get rid of for allure. Um, and that changes the math on how frequently they're good a lot. And I think the math is always something very contentious with branded because you can't build branded based off of math alone. It's not possible because I mean you would just be there all day trying to figure things out because so many different combinations of different cards can lead to the same end board. And it's a little bit too much of a complicated mess to try to map out the entire branded deck. I think it is a useful exercise sometimes to just simply look at specific things like Allure versus High Spirits. And when you play 3 copies of Allure in your deck, if you just decide to play standard ratios of like 3 Albaz, 2 to 3 Aluber, um, 1 or 2 Mercurier, 1 to 3 Tragedy, Adlib, all that. You only need 3 good Allure banishes in your deck to make Allure mathematically justified. Uh, I don't have all of my spreadsheets out with me right
yeah.
now, but like you only need like either 2 Tragedy, 1 Mercurier, or 2 Mercurier, 1 Tragedy in your deck. Um, if you play all the standard other dark monsters in the deck, or the math to really be there for Allure. That's not the case with high spirits. In the case of high spirits, you need to have the two extra Sarnier that don't really do anything to do that. So it's a bigger deck building concession that has to be made in order to include high spirits if you want to maintain that level of consistency where you can play like an 11, 12 round tournament. Um, and so that's like the primary difference for me, and why I think I personally prefer to play three Alert and one high spirits as opposed to like three high spirits because um, the math works out a little bit better, and I feel much more comfortable entering a tournament um, when I know I've checked the all the boxes, and made sure everything checks out with the math.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting actually. You said that so do you how much does math go into, because you mentioned with, I mean obviously with branded, we're running anywhere between 40 and 60 cards, so math is sometimes just, we, like you said, you can be there all day trying to get it quote unquote correct, but do you, in terms of ratios, like when you go, before you go to an event with a branded deck, do you math out ratios, or are there any things that you do to prepare for your deck building to make sure that things are quote unquote mathematically correct?
Yeah. And there's a lot to think about here, so I don't want to like just info dump, and I want to talk about a few specific things that I think are matter particularly to branded. Um, One is you math is important, but you always have to test, right? I mean, that's common sense. Two is I think every person should always know their chance of hard drawing branded fusion, their deck list.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's always a useful number to know. So, I mean, add up your copies of Alubers, openings, branded fusions, and then also include your copies of uh, Fish Burial and Gold Sark, and against Kit, because those cards equal branded fusion every single time. So that population of cards, whether that's it's anywhere from 9 to 12 hard copies of branded fusion that you can play, um, like that number matters. But that's not your total consistency, right? Because there's a million in other two card combos that get to branded fusion. Um, I think though one of the things in math that uh, for Yu-Gi-Oh that's really important is not even looking at your own deck. So it's something I talked about a little bit earlier, but looking at the format. Um, there's this guy Ivan Campos, always known as also called like Super Pluto, I believe. And he has these spreadsheets where he finds every single topping deck list and lists out the non-engine that they're playing. And that's incredibly useful because you can see, and it's updated on a week by week basis. So you can see last week what percentage of people were main decking Ash Blossom, what percentage of people were main decking Roll, what percent was siding Bestials, and now you have an EV, an expected value of how frequently X hand trap will get dropped on you at a tournament because people change their decks based off of what happened the week before. If there's a big tournament that happens, all these profiles come out in that coming week. Everybody looks at those deck profiles, and then everybody uses those deck profiles and lists to come up with what they're bringing this weekend, right? And and this is an exercise, and this exercise is why I tell people, hey, it really doesn't matter what you think is like you're comfortable with, or like what you think is best or what you're used to playing branded. You should simply change your deck based on the format trends because something else will, you know, like things change. You can't always play patchwork. For example, I'm not playing patchwork right now. Even though that's one of my favorite ways to play branded is to play patchwork. So um, like the three imperm, three Veiler thing, meaning that I always want there's an over 50% chance of getting hit by one of those if your opponent's playing 40 cards and getting three copies of each. And that very strongly justifies the three Cartesia as a deck building concept. Um, Another another one is like steals in the side. Um, there was like I want to say like 30-40% of people were signing Bistials. And so now like now you know,
Yeah.
okay, hey, 1 out of 3 games post side, I will see a Bistial. If I don't get Bistialed in at least 1 out of 3 games post side, I actually got lucky, if anything. And that completely shifts uh, your mentality when it comes to deck building because like now you have a much more, now you can't just say you got sacked, you know. And I think that is like a very helpful thing when it comes to improving and especially improving your deck building is thinking about these things and watching the format and how it develops in that way.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. Very well said. And I think we're gonna have to probably link to. It, you said it was who is this? Who is the person on Twitter with the spreadsheets? Um,
I'm in campus. I'll send it to you so that you can link it for all the viewers today. But for everybody watching, like this is absolutely something that I think is super important. Is acknowledging that you didn't get sacked. You should just take a look at what is statistically going to happen um, based off of the deck lists of the previous week and prepare for that in your deck building and prepare for that in your testing for a tournament. Like here's another good example of that. Ash Blossom, right? We all hate Ash, and um, like it doesn't always matter when you get ashed, but sometimes it does. Uh, and I've heard a lot of branded players at like my locals, for example, or just around, or I see comments online like, "Ah, oh, he had Ash Blossom," you know, like he just had it. Um, and but here's the math: if they play 3 copies of Ash Blossom in their 40 card main deck, there's a 34% chance they open Ash Blossom. So if you play a 3 game match and you get Ash Blossom once, that's supposed to happen.
yep.
And if you didn't get Ash Blossomed at all in a 3 game match, you actually got lucky
Yep.
that you didn't get Ash. And if you got ashed twice in a 3 game match, you'd be like, oh, okay, so if I get ashed twice, then that means I got unlucky. Well, actually, that happens in like 1 out of 10 games, and it's a 34% chance. So like that. So if you play it in a regional, right, probably in one of your rounds you're gonna get ashed. And if you play in a YCS or you just go to locals for like once a week for a month, you're more likely than not going to get ashed 3 times in one game if you take a larger sample size. Um, and the flip side of that is you're lucky if that didn't happen to you. So like that shift in thinking about those sort of things, I think is like one of the most important things in my mind.
100%. I learning from using your losses and then also following the week to week trends, definitely like one of the some of the best ways I think for someone to improve in their game. I always recommend for people because like a lot of people will just they won't see, I think like rewatching your gameplay is huge because you can see
Right.
misplays that you made and being able to spot misplays in real time too, combination of those things, if you're able to learn from your mistakes, you aren't going to be making that misplay again. So I think like that's just kind of like a little bit of a dovetail to because I felt like we had a little bit of a good segment there where we're talking about like ways
Yeah,
for you to improve and really not taking a negative and turning it into a positive for the game kind of thing. So
absolutely.
yeah, and I think that I think that does it pretty well for the deck building discussion. I think that Um, I was gonna say it was pretty interesting because back in tier limit format, everyone was running like a billion bestials and high spirits because it was very much correct for that format. And now I feel like we see formats come in and out, and cards come in and out, and it's just very cool that we still see branded just doing well with a lot of different things. I heard someone testing duality in the branded group chat, and I'm just like, that's cool. That's a cool card. I feel
Yeah,
like when if we're expecting it to get hand trapped a bunch of the times, well, okay, I'm gonna go Cartesia and go Cartesia effect, and then just like make a Grand Guignol, and then they're gonna go Imperm. I'm gonna chain duality, and they're gonna be looking silly. So these are
yeah,
things
really cool.
that I think that we could all be considering going forward.
Yeah,
So
definitely keep that open mind because there's so many cool things to try.
yeah, 100%. Like I love Nadir Servant. That's a card I went back to say in Super Poly as well. Those are two cards that I'm kind of testing with this format that I wasn't on
Oh,
last
you're
format.
back on Super Poly again. I've been thinking
Yes.
about that. Yeah, it's a
You aren't playing Super
pretty
Poly right now?
no, and I mean, there's a lot of concessions you have to make for Super Poly, right? The extra deck space is a pretty huge one. Um, and I don't know. But the thing is, if you ask me what I want to play, I want to play Super Poly, man. That card is so dope. Like because come on, man. Whenever you go like set Albaz, Super Poly their board, like Super Poly their Apo way to make a Mirror Jade, Mirror Jade go battle phase, attack something, and then Mirror Jade banish something, you just
It's so
you just
good.
smoked them. You just dunked on them, right? Like
It's good
um
against every
and
deck.
yeah, no, it's crazy. And I think um Super Poly is low key one of the reasons I think people play branded or that you know it's one of the things that I think draws people to branded is because like you can destroy people with the Super Poly. Um, it was really hard for me to cut Super Poly because I don't think
Yeah.
it's that strong into Fire King or Snake Eye. Um,
Yeah, that's where a lot of people started cutting that card this format. I feel like I have not seen many people on Super Poly, but I just figured I was like, oh, with
yeah.
the new decks, maybe we would pick it up, or it might be a little
It
bit
destroys
better.
Senpai.
Yes,
It destroys Tenpai and it destroys Melodious, which are two decks that that we're about to talk about soon.
yes. So I guess we could just jump right into that, and then we'll end with a little history, and then so yeah, Tenpai and Melodious. We'll talk about Tenpai because that is the really like everyone's favorite deck at the moment. To just win the YCS Japan. Obviously, that's a whole different format, but I feel like it's a deck that will be very relevant going forward.
Did it
Um,
win? I believe it got second, I
was it
thought.
second? Oh yeah, you're right. It did get second. That's my bad. It got second to Voiceless. My bad. Um,
Yeah, that's all right.
it had number
Um,
one representation. That's why I wanted to
yes,
say
it did.
yes.
Yes, you're correct. You're correct. It was the most represented deck in a best of one format, which I think is to be expected.
Yes.
Uh, Senpai is a very interesting deck, and I have a couple thoughts on it. One of them is, and this may offend people, Tempai is flu. It's literally flu because
Really.
it's a deck that uh, is relatively straightforward to play. And when the deck draws the right hand, it is basically unbeatable. However, the pilot does not have that much agency over the outcome of the game. A lot of the times it's very hand dependent. And if they don't draw the right hand, then um, they can't get there. There's not that many ways for you to use the Tempai cards because there aren't that many to outplay your opponent. And so it is one of those decks I think that the more people understand the interactions of it, the more people side deck for it. Um, it's gonna fall down and down in representation until a format where people kind of forget about it and they don't prepare for it as much, and then it comes in and just sweeps everybody for a tournament or two, and, and then people have to prepare for it again. Um, but in terms of like what kind of deck it is, I very much think it's a deck like Blue. There's not that much agency for the pilot to decide the outcome of. It's really, really, deck building dependent and hand dependent, and also dependent on what everybody else is deciding and how they're playing their decks.
Yeah, no, it's I've heard a lot of people kind of break it down to the deck plays itself, and I'm not like I've heard people say it's a quote unquote helmet deck. I'm not like and I'm not trying to reduce any deck down to, but I think you're correct on the fact that it's very much kind of like yeah, when they draw the four like three or four non-engine plus their one extender, like their two extenders on their sixth card, like it feels a very like they're very much gonna get through no whatever. But I think as a branded player in particular, I think that we have a lot of different options. And I think there's a lot of different general things too, even if you don't play branded. That we're gonna mention, but I think that in particular as branded players, I think that we have a pretty I don't know how if how you feel, but also, well, I do since we talked about it before this podcast, but for the sake of the podcast, yeah, no, I think that the Tenpai matchup is fairly straightforward for us because a lot of the time what they will end up doing is just giving us first. So game one is pretty straightforward, and then it really just depends on deck building where that's going to go from there because it could be either my experience where they give me second or they give me first again, and I don't even see that they're playing Tenpai essentially, because I just gimmick puppet them twice because they don't, maybe they'll see the hands of a bunch of hand traps. But once again, like there's some builds that even run like just board breakers with Tenpai, and that kind of build is super susceptible to our deck in my opinion, with our ability to kind of gimmick lock in the draw phase.
Yeah.
So
Um,
yeah, no, if
yeah.
you want to expand on that.
Um, so one of the things that, the reason why Senpai was by far the most represented deck in Top Cut for YCS Japan, um, was because it was the best of one. And Tempai has the best game one in the format right now, except against Branded. Like you said, they're an experienced branded pilot or just somebody who like drew at the at the very minimum a decent hand and knows what they're doing and pop it lock through a hand trap or two, and also through a board breaker or two. So like that game one, Empire literally just hands it to you. They really just hand it to you. Like they give it to you for free. And apart from that, on top of the fact that Senpai must stop the puppet lock in order for them to play the game. Um, Even a Mirror Jade is a very tall ask for them to get over with their engine. Um, because say they have a normal summon, right, and they go to battle phase with that normal summon, and you just Mirror Jade banish it, right? And that's very tough for them. Now they can have the quick play spell extender. They have a quick play spell that lets them search a Tempai to their hand, and if that quick play spell is activated in the battle phase, they can then special summon a Fire Dragon. Um, that's like their one real extender, and a branded and red into Chimera, or a Rinbrum special summoning Albaz from the graveyard, or even just making a Dragostapelia, making a Borreload Furious Dragon, making Megan the Reliever. Any interruption really stops that second extender as well. And so when you have a deck that um, is only good at going second, is very susceptible to removal, right? And that's the recipe for a type of deck that is very, very weak to branded. And so I expect to see as the format develops, Tenpai players realizing this and realizing, hey, guys, we need to prepare super, super hard for branded. Otherwise, like we're just not going to be able to beat them. And you can see kind of some shifts in that direction now already. A lot of
Yeah.
Tenpai players are main decking Magnemite, which is not necessarily just for us because Magnemite's just a good card in the Tenpai deck, but it is good against Branded to have a Magnemite. But they may now start to play the Magnemite with also a Druis Worm in their main deck, to have another Bestial specifically to be able to search instead of just like a random dragon. So like and if that were to happen, where they start building their non-engine specifically for Brandon, because it is such an abysmal matchup for them. It is really, really ugly matchup for them. Um, we might have to start playing non-engine for Tempai as well too. Um, and there's a lot of options there. I don't know how much should we give away the goo? um,
um
yeah.
Well, I think there's a few different things to consider in terms of like because I do want to mention well, okay, so we'll talk about the tech choices and then I'll mention this funny tech I heard over the weekend that Tenpai was doing. Well, I heard they were going into Kwaki Miru Drago going first against Branded, so that's something that we could always
Mhm.
consider. That happened to my friend Yuri at the Rosemont regionals. I'm pretty sure the guy ended up topping. So that guy was prepared for
Cool. Cool.
Brand going into the seals into special Kawaki Miru Drago. Like what are you supposed to have for that? Like a dark hole, or are we gonna start siding dark hole for Tenpai dragons? I'm not sure, but there's a lot of things that obviously I think what has been said so far are things like threatening roar, and D barrier. Now, are these things pretty good or not? I don't think we've seen anyone really run threatening roar this weekend. I feel like that's such a specific thing for one matchup that I'm not sure if it's something that is something that we're gonna be justified in running. Like you said, it's something where if they start really adjusting their deck, or Tenpai starts adjusting their deck building to Branded in particular, that will start having to side specifically into it. But I think I saw like the top four Rosemont regional, I think, list was that topped with Branded Despia was running D barrier in the side, which I feel like is a really just a fair thing that people could be running for a pretty good general spread, um, that will hit other decks like
Yeah, my
such as
boy
purrely.
Freddie. Um, yeah, he and I worked on this together. And it's actually interesting. Is like originally he wasn't like he was just gonna play like two fusion duplication in the side, but he didn't have those, so you gotta put in some extra traps. Um, put in like I think one different dimension ground and then one branded banishment. And then he'll also just have that one D barrier in there for Tempai. Uh, I really advocate against threatening roar. Um, and the reason that I think threatening roar is not the move is because it only works against him. And it's a bit too targeted to just have that specific card just for Tenpai. Because and here's the thing, like if you play that one threatening roar to search off of thrust, like what if they don't hand trap you? You know, that's also kind of like kind of weird to do that. And also like the threatening roar, you would never slot it into any other map. Like, what's it for? Specifically Tempai. So cards like D Barrier, I definitely think are um, much more worth siding. But a couple other things that, if Tempai becomes really, really popular and they start also really, really preparing for branded is Super Poly. If you Super Poly Tempai, they're done for. They're absolutely done for. Like you make um, they go into a dragon. So they go into like the white dragon, and the white dragon searches the extender, and the extender summons like the tuner. Um, if you Super Poly there, like it's curtains. Um, so I know we were talking about how like we don't play Super Poly, or a lot of people cut Super Poly because it's not that good into the best deck of the format, which is the fire decks. Um, if Tempai, starts getting up there in representation, that may again shift whether or not it's good to play Super Poly. Because You just can't do anything about it. And um, if they're afraid of Super Poly, they would want to play stuff like Lightning Storm, right? They also don't want to keep in Lightning Storm against us because if they get puppet locked, then the Lightning Storm doesn't work. So it puts them in a very difficult catch-22 when you have stuff like Super Poly in against them. Another thing that is like a multi-utility use card against them, and Nightfall really, really likes. I think is okay, but you know, Nightfall seems to really enjoy this is Book of Eclipse. Um, that card is also very, very difficult for Tenpai to deal with. Like they really just gotta have Ash Blossom or like two Ash Blossoms. They need to have one for your Branded Fusion and then one for the Book of Eclipse. Um, Statistically, very improbable for them to have an answer to the Book of Eclipse as well. So yeah, overall, I'd say learn what the Tempai cards do. Familiarize yourself with them, and make some deck building or side decking concessions for them if you think it's necessary. But don't sweat the matchup too much. It's not. It's actually pretty favorable for us that Tempai exists, um, as like that's one more favorable matchup for Branded, and it is also a matchup where the non-engine that is good against Senpai is not necessarily good against Branded either, with the exception of D-Barrier, which
Yes.
is unfortunate if people side more D-Barrier.
Yes, that is unfortunate, and I was hoping maybe that wouldn't catch on because some people on Tenpai are doing this side pattern where they do a link, side in some link monsters to do a Zealantis OTK, but I've heard D
Mhm.
barrier. I don't know. I'm not sure if D barrier exactly gets around that or not, but uh, either way, yeah, no, I think that the Tenpai matchup is pretty straightforward and another one of our.
There's technically a way for them to kill you without synchro summoning using, I mean, basically it's basically the Xenantis OTK, or it's like a very it's like their variation of it. It's not very consistent because they need extra pieces. Like they can't just do like the one card OTK that way. Um, and so like generally, I think D-Bear is probably going to stop them. Um, so it'll be unfortunate if that becomes like a huge trend for people to run D-Barrier. But I actually think it's not too big of a deal if D-Barrier becomes popular. D-Barrier only matters if you lose game one. Like if you win game one, game two they D-Barrier you, game three D-Barrier is not real.
Yep.
So like you know it's not the end of the world if D-Barrier becomes super popular.
Yeah, no, we'll see how that ends up playing out, but I completely agree. And then I guess on the other side of the coin, we also have Melodious, which I feel like isn't as defined as Tenpai. It's much more of I wouldn't say obscure, but it's much more of a combo heavy deck that isn't as I guess just like you can't just pick up the deck and play it kind of as Tenpai. So I think
Yeah.
that Melodious is going to prove to be a very good deck going forward. I think it's going to be one of the best decks going forward. I mean,
Um,
say that again.
yeah. I have a couple of friends who are labbing Melodious super hard right now, and they really really enjoy it. And I also think that people haven't necessarily figured out the correct way to play it yet, or the optimal way to play Melodious hasn't necessarily been defined yet. And so there's a lot of room for experimentation and growth with Melodious. Some people are playing the Odyssey Vortex stuff. Some people are playing it more pure. Some people are playing a Melodious package of like seven, eight cards. Um, just make a free Apo, which is also pretty cool. Um, in terms of testing against it, my experience has mostly been testing against the pure Melodious deck, not playing the Vortex Dragon. So that's and at the moment, obviously format, to be determined. To this must be developed later on, and more and more. Um, I do think the pure version is a little bit more clean. You have a lot more room for non-engine. Um, so I think that's probably going to be the popular build moving forward. Uh, Again, and this is also good news, I think the Brandon matchup is pretty favored. It's pretty favored because they can't go second into Branded without hand traps. You just can't. They can't gas through the board, and they don't have an in-engine way to beat Puppet Lock if you do it properly. But like going first against it, you if you win the die roll, you pretty much just win every single time. One of the things you do have to watch out for is if you have access to Branded Lost, you have to play it as early as possible. Now, some people they like to go like deployment, summon Cartesia, then normal summon Aluber, and then search Branded Fusion, and then if they have a Lost, then they go activate Lost, then they activate the Branded Fusion, and it seems like not a very big deal. Um, but it is against Melodious because a lot of times they play Herald of the Orange Light. So if you deployment into Cartesia and normal summon the Luber and they go activate Imprint Veiler on the Luber, and you go chain Cartesia, they can change Orange Light there, and that is really, really bad for you. So like, um,
That card is devastating.
yeah, that would be devastating. Like you probably just lose there unless you hard drew the Branded Fusion, and like I mean, then you just drew the custom hand, right? So like you should be winning anyways. Like say you didn't draw the custom hand, you just drew like an average hand, and that's something that can come up. And the reason I bring it up is because I got destroyed in testing when that happened. Um, so I could have just played the Branded Lost earlier and completely avoided that. Um, the end board. Speaking of Branded Lost, though, the end board is oftentimes they end on a quick effect bounce, like and a quick effect DD Crow for 3. Again, that is something that uh, loses really really hard to Branded Lost. So in the Melodious matchup, obviously in most matchups you want to prioritize getting Branded Lost, but in the Melodious matchup specifically, Brandon Lost is pretty much like the game winner. It's like the same thing as like against Voiceless. If you get to Lost and then you activate Branded Fusion, the game is over. So like that is something that I would prioritize trying to get to. Because sometimes like if you go second into a deck and you have a Luber Branded Fusion or opening Branded Fusion, sometimes a Luber gets the in red instead. Sometimes people will go like a Luber search high spirits, activate high spirits instead. Um, Generally, I found it correct against Melodious and also I guess against Voiceless to get the Branded Lost first, because if you don't get the Branded Lost and you activate Branded Fusion into their end board, the Branded Fusion actually just doesn't do anything.
Yep.
Um, it actually does nothing if you activate Branded Lost without or Branded Fusion without Branded Lost up, because they can banish things from your graveyard if you go for the Albion line, and they can bounce your Rebellion if you go for a Dark line instead of a Light line. So like, um, whichever way you go with the Branded Fusion, they're going to stop you completely. So yeah, one of the good things though is uh, their the Aria. They have a couple like bricks that they play, and the purpose of the bricks is to grant them like battle destruction, card destruction protection, um, or like targeting protection. Um, and obviously those things just don't matter against Granite because you have a non-targeting banish with Mirror Jade. Uh, so like yeah, I think Melodious also tends to be relatively favored branded. Um, it gets a little bit more hairy if they go for the Apo like Vortex stuff. But like again, if you have the Branded Lost, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So
No.
if yeah yeah
Yeah. No.
that's
So
my thoughts on Melodious.
sorry, you wanted to finish your thought, or
Oh, I mean, no, I mean, overall, both Tenpai and Melodious are really, really cool decks that play in a very unique way, but their existence is good for Branded, I think.
Okay. Yeah, no, 100%. I sorry, I thought I caught you off there before you finished your thought there before, so that's why I asked. But yeah, no, I think that that gives us a pretty good overview of the matchups. Do you think that I guess Melodious, I think you mentioned definitely they have a really tough time going second against us, and it really only just gets tricky once you go brand. It's kind of like you said, it's brand fusion is pretty useless under if you're not under lost if they have their boss monsters up. So if you can threaten that bounce, if you can, or even these, I think droplet obviously does a number to that kind of board, which is still one of my favorite board breakers.
Yeah, Droplet, Super Poly too. So like, I mean, these are both decks where like if you like Tenpai and Melodious, they're both decks where if you drop a Super Poly on them, they're done. They're just like super screwed. Um, so like if and I keep bringing this up because like it really stuck with me that you said you're testing Super Poly right now because it's a good time to test Super Poly. It really is. Like post Legacy of Destruction format, post banlist, like this is a really good time to revisit Super Poly. And it's also like a good example of like, hey, decided earlier in the format that Super Poly is something we cut, but like we can't just make that assumption that that stays true forever. Not play Super Poly, right? Like that's also a bad assumption to say, okay, now we're never gonna revisit Super Poly, never gonna test it again. So like I'm very, very happy that you brought it up. As if I can justify playing Super Poly again in my deck, I absolutely will.
Yeah, that card fills a role that no other card does, and that I've won so many games because of Super Poly before. Like I've won games just setting two Super Polys and passing. Like that card
Yeah,
is nuts. And
you break on Super Poly, but it's fine.
yep. And that's why another like kind of like dovetail in the deck building. I think like running the quick play board breakers is obviously the way with branded. Because if you because a lot of people ask like why don't you main like feather duster or something like that, and I feel like it's just a lot better to main these board breakers that are playable going first because 50% of the time you will be going first or you will be going second. So you want cards that are playable either or, and Feather Duster is not very playable going first, and that's why it's kind of relegated to the side.
You
Um,
have that one guy in the Branded Kings chat about McMasters, but he frequently asks, "Hey guys, what do you think about main deck Duster?" And every time it's like, "Bro, please don't,
yeah, no,
please
for
don't do that."
sure. Like it might work out. Like if you play against the Rescue Ace player and you see your Duster game one, you know
Oh,
what? You made
you feel
the
good.
yeah, you made the correct call, man. I got like sure, but you can't account for that, and I think in general it's basically like not correct, and that's why I think Super Poly and Droplet are very good. I'm actually on both of them. It's a very interesting combination seeing a Super Poly Droplet and then like two to three or like two extenders and like a thrust. Like that's to me like very much like a dream hand, like going second, and plus on top of that you get a sixth card. So lots of things to consider for this upcoming format, and for everybody with the new decks and everything like that. I did want to ask.
Absolutely.
I did want to ask you before we sign off here, kind of like what how you ended up getting into Yu-Gi-Oh and kind of like how you got into branded. Like when did you start playing Yu-Gi-Oh, my man?
So I played ever since I was a little kid with my little brother, but I mean, like a lot of us, took a little break throughout like high school, college. And then around COVID time, everybody's quarantined, super bored. I was like sitting there, I was like, I just need new hobbies. I just need something to think about all day, other than school, because I was still in school at that point. Um, and so my roommates and I, we got back into Yu-Gi-Oh! We decided to like, hey, we'll just play Yu-Gi-Oh! I picked up Drytron, and that deck was my first like modern new love. I really, really enjoyed Drytron, and I got my first regional top with it in Minneapolis. Um, and that was a deck I played for a while. But I think one of the things I didn't like about Drytron was that it only really played on my turn, and so I wanted to look for other decks. I always paid attention to the OCG for for inspiration and for new things to go through. And they announced Aluber, the Jester of Despia, and in Dawn, I think it was Dawn of Majesty. Um, and so like that card looked really cool because I really like Shadal's back in the day. Like
Mm,
I think a lot of branded players were Shadal fans.
yes.
Like so I was like, oh, like I'm gonna keep an eye out on this Despia archetype. See where it goes from here. Because like Guardian Chimera and Brandon and Red were also announced around the same time as Aluber, so like I knew about this. But then one day I log onto Yu-Gi-Oh or YGO organization. They announce a new structure deck, and they announce some new cards for that structure deck. There's two cards that stuck out to me. Branded Fusion. I read that card for the first time, like just the translation of it. I was like, oh, this is like Shadal Fusion, but like way stronger, right? And scroll down a little bit, and I read Mirror Jade, the Ice Blade Dragon, and that's when I'm like, I have to play this deck.
Yep.
Like, Mirror Jade is the best designed boss monster in Yu-Gi-Oh history. I'll die on that hill. Like it's like the perfect boss monster in terms of everything. The interruption effect, the follow up, the grave floating effect, the design, the stats of it, the how accessible it is to summon it out. Um, and also the restriction to balance it out that you can only control one. Because if it didn't have that restriction, it'd be more
Bannable.
broken.
Yeah, it'd be
Uh,
bannable.
yeah, like bandwidth broken. Because you would just play three marriages and just summon all three of them. um, so like that's how I got started playing Branded, and honestly, like I played Branded since the deck was out, and I've tried switching to other decks here and there. Um, I like Branded is the deck to me that feels like I have the most agency. Like I have the most control over the outcome of the game, whether I win or lose, with Branded. Because with a lot of other decks like Snake Eyes, like I have a full, you know, max rarity foreign print Snake Eye deck that I bought that I was so excited to play. And then I actually played it, and then I would just get hand trapped twice and pounce, and then pray the hand traps I drew stop them, which sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. Um, and I hated that gameplay. Like it's just so boring to me, or just like, it feels like outside of your control. I also like played TEARLAMENTS. I played Sprite back when those came out. I tried purrely and Mathematic, and all those decks are great. They just don't. I just don't think you have as much agency over the outcome of the game with them as you do Branded, and so that's why I've stuck to Brand so long. And I'm literally not going to stop playing this deck until they. I don't even know what they would have to hit for Brandon to not be good. Because limiting Branded Fusion doesn't do it. Like the deck is still good if you limit Branded Fusion. You would have to like ban the red Albion.
Really, that's what you'd think. Like I've heard some people say maybe like banning Grand Guignol or something, but no, yeah, banning the Red Albion. That would do a lot. Because that would essentially kill a lot of the grind game that the deck has because being able to set the spells and traps is huge. That gives Mirror Jade its
Yeah,
advantage loop. Yeah, no, I completely
yeah,
agree actually because you see Brand Diffusion at 1 in the OCG and the deck still I mean it's not
fun.
it's not the strongest deck over there, but it's still like able to compete, you know. So,
If they kept Brand opening at 3 and they put Brand Fusion at 1, it literally would just be totally fine. Like I'm serious. I think the reason the Branded Fusion at 1 matters is because they also have Brand opening at 1. So that like you have 3 Aluber, but Aluber's a normal summon. So like you only have two copies of Brand Fusion, one opening and one Brand Fusion that aren't normal summons. So like that's what I think the critical part of that is. Like yeah, you could just if they only limited Branded Fusion, you could play Branded Synchro. You could play like Brandon and Wyatt. You could play like more Quens and Bestials, and I like I I literally think it'd be and the Deer Servant, which you said you really like because Deer Servant is a cool card. Like all those things can substitute for that extra copies of Branded Fusion. Um, yeah, like I've just been playing Branded ever since then, and don't think I'm going to stop for a very, very long time. So, I mean, um, yeah, they're gonna have to pry this deck from my cold dead hand.
Do you think and we love to hear that, and we appreciate you taking the deck and piloting at such a high level, going back to back with these regional tops, and then also doing very well over at YCS Vegas. We were all rooting for you, brother. So we always love to see Branded pilot at a very high level, and so I guess there's two other questions because you did actually mention branded synchro again, which is that surprised me. You brought branded synchro to YCS Indy. That's something that I get asked a lot about. That I'm not too familiar with that kind of brand, and that's cool to know that you've actually been you have tested that build in the past. Do you think branded synchro is a viable build and right now, especially post like Baron Savage ban? And
Um,
how do you feel about it?
so I brought, like I said, I brought Brandon Synchro to YCS Indy last year, and that was a tournament that Rescue Ace was the best deck, where YCS where Rescue Ace was the main contender and also the first big event with race. Um, but I decided to bring Branded Synchro because it had a crazy, crazy advantage. And that advantage is you can make Baron and then set up Puppet Lock. It was unbeatable. Unbeatable. The average amount of hand traps in everybody's deck is everybody was playing 12 hand traps. Because Race was not as efficient of an engine as Snake Eye, so they could only fit in around like 12 non-engine into like a 42 card deck. Um, and so if you look at the, expected values of how often you would get hand trapped for that format, um, you were consistently making a Baron and then setting up a puppet lock. And that was how I played the branded synchro deck back. And I did pretty well with it. I actually finished X2 at that Y Cincinnati with branded synchro. Um, and but it was one of those things where like you just don't have the tiebreakers, and so there was like 20 or 30, I don't know, just a ton of X2s that didn't make it into Top Cut, which is unfortunate, but like that's part of the game, and I was still really happy with the fact that I only tested the deck for like a week beforehand. Um, uh, the person who kind of showed me a lot of the stuff with Grand Synchro is Robbie Pham. He uh, basically co-created Branded Synchro with Nesh. And so he was giving me a bunch of pointers before that point, but he wasn't playing Puppet in Branded Synchro. And that's where I think, like, that's what I really had it. And it's just like, no, you can straight up just go for Puppet
Yeah.
with these cards. And so, like, and you also just didn't care about Ash Blossom at all. You didn't care about Ash Blossom whatsoever in Branded Synchro. Um, so, yeah, it's honestly my favorite way to play the deck. Like, I think it's super, super fun because it's like Dragon Link combined with Branded. It's like it's so dope. But I would not play it right now. Like for this format right now, um, absolutely not because Branded Synchro plays around Ash way better, and it plays around your opponent having like random back row better. Um, like like a rescue ace row. Um, but it plays into removal worse because you have to keep a bistro body on the board, and Quem and Cartesia as tuner bodies also matters. Um, So like playing the deck in a more fusion way, you care about removal, like SP banish and cure and pop way less when you play it as a fusion deck instead of a synchro deck. But like yeah, I would not play right now, especially not without Baron because you have to substitute Baron with Chaos Angel, which is great, but Chaos Angel does not replace the like Baron protecting your puppet lock and being the most disgusting combo ever. So like yeah, it's a fantastic deck, and when Fire gets hit, I'll definitely revisit Branded Synchro. And if I find something cool, I'll definitely show you. I'll show all the guys in the group chat if I find something really cool with it. But like right now, not the move, unfortunately.
Okay, I appreciate that because we've had a lot of questions on the channel about branded synchro, so I wanted to talk to somebody who knows the deck pretty well, and yeah, no, we'll definitely have to. If you end up revisiting the deck, would love to have you maybe back on to talk about it more. But I think that my last question was because we were talking about potential bans to branded. I think that once the ban list season comes back around, maybe we'll get it like right before Nats, right after Nats. But Sanctifier being banned or not, does that matter for a deck? Do you think it's likely?
Um,
How do you feel about like a Sanctifier ban?
so like to me, a Sanctifier ban is like almost a non-hit. Like in terms of like what they could hit and how much it would impact the deck. Uh, Sanctifier ban falls very, very low on the list of things that I think actually matters. I think brand diffusion to one would matter more than banning Sanctifier.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of things that matter way, way more than Sanctifier. Because at the end of the day, and let's be real here, you don't need Puppet to win going first. Like that's actually not the like Puppet is not necessary to win going first. I can't really think of much decks that can play through 2 to 3 Mirror Jade banishes, Rimbram summoning Outbash from the graveyard to fuse, and then also Branded and Red into Chimera, and then also the Mercurial that you search afterwards. Like that's a lot of removal to play through. So like other apart from like Tearlament with the Millers or the Mirror, oftentimes if you get that far, you're not losing anyways, right? So the puppet is kind of just um, it's to me, I don't even necessarily see puppet as a win count. I just see it as a way to save time. They
Yeah.
just scoop it up and then we don't have to, summon masquerade to burn in time. Like just puppet lock them, pass it back to you, and then OTK them. All right, let's go next game. Um, that's more of what I see puppet as. It's just a time saver. So yeah, I definitely think banning Sanctifier will make less people play it, and will also make less people care for granted. Um, but it doesn't influence the viability of the deck much at all. Like I think this is something that you can agree with is like like if you end on a bunch of Mirror Jade banishes and Brandon and Red and all that stuff, that's just enough to win anyways. And any relatively experienced Brandon player will be able to figure out how to get there and also how to use those interruptions correctly to make sure they don't die. Because you don't even have to stop your opponent from doing anything. They can play a little bit, but you just have to make sure you don't die and you follow up, and then you still win in those games. So yeah, anti-fire ban is probably correct for them to do eventually, but it's not going to change the deck that much in my.
Yeah, I always said if Sanctifier gets banned, that's kind of them taking a bullet, or Sanctifier taking a bullet kind of for like a, a, an additional hit, because if we start getting to other things besides Branded Fusion and Sanctifier, things could actually start getting dicey for the deck. But I think Branded is such a resilient deck, almost like TEARLAMENTS, where they'll actually have to take a hacksaw to the deck before it becomes unviable.
They just got banned every game.
Yep,
Let's look at the game.
yep. So, I do think that Branded is gonna stick around for a good bit. I've always told people it's a pretty good investment of a deck, because it's gonna be in terms of like if you want a deck that will be playable for a year, So
Yeah, they're gonna have to like power creep it with another fusion deck.
yeah.
Like, and I don't even know what that looks like. Power creeping Branded Fusion, because Branded Fusion was power creeping Shaddoll Fusion. So like, I don't even know what's next. Is it like Branded Fusion combined with Nadir Servant in one card? Like, like is that how we power creep it? But like, yeah. Apart from that, or them just straight up banning Albaz or banning Albion the Branded Dragon, the deck's gonna be fine.
Yeah, and like Konami, they like to keep decks around at this point. I've heard like Konami officials like before say that they like I think they've publicly stated that they like having, or players like it when there are more decks to play. And I think Branded is a fan favorite deck, so it's very much one of those decks that I think we'll see like a
Around stick.
Sanctifier hit or like a Branded Fusion hit eventually. But it's a tough deck to win with still technical play. Like it's easy to get your foot in the door, like and learn a couple puppet lock lines, but learning the deck on a level to take it to a high level is so much more. So I think that overall that the deck has a lot of life still in it. And with that being said, I do really want to appreciate and thank you for coming on the channel, Sam. I think this has been a wonderful conversation. We talked about so much, and I think that this is going to be a wonderful listen for everybody who got through it. So is there anywhere that people, or do you want to mention your team's YouTube channel once again for people to go check that out?
Yeah, so my team is called the Greenview Yu-Gi-Oh Club, and we have a YouTube channel where we post topping deck profiles from around the team. So yeah, if you'd like to join us on our silly, whimsical adventures playing the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game, please check it out and subscribe. But yeah,
Yes,
thank you for having
please.
me on. Like, this has been super fun. Always been a huge fan of the channel, and I think you put out absolutely fantastic branded content. Like, guys, for everyone listening, like, you should be watching the videos that Chris uploads every week. Like, this is how you want to stay up to date on what's going on what are the meta trends, on what are the new techs, what are the new deck building ratios that people are talking about, and what all of the good players are testing. This is the best way to stay up to date with that. So yeah, I mean, thank you for having me.
That means a lot. Thank you, sir. And I really appreciate it, Sam. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm looking forward to more in the future. I wish you luck with events coming up. And thank you very much, like I said, for coming on. And once again, everybody, please check out Sam's team down in the description. It will be linked. And with that being said, I think we're going to be signing out there. Make sure to leave a like and comment below. Subscribe. Leave some questions. We'll answer them in the next podcast. Sorry this one wasn't live, but I still think that we made up very well with it, because we talked about so much, and it was a very informative podcast. So, all right. We'll be seeing you guys later. Have a good day, everybody.